The stars twisted in ways they should not have twisted, and Admiral Vescara knew her fleet was dying. 12 ships of the Kethrian Expeditionary Fleet had been charting the outer reaches of unexplored space when reality itself seemed to tear around them, spitting them out into a system that their navigational computers did not recognize and could not map against any known stellar configurations. Vask stood on the bridge of the flagship Eternal Wanderer, her 4 eyes scanning the damage reports that flooded her screens in angry red symbols that meant catastrophic failure, complete systems loss, irreparable damage to the exotic matter drives that had carried her people across the stars for 3,000 years. Status report, she commanded, though she already knew the answer would bring no comfort her. Chief Engineer Drask approached with his head tendrils hanging low and the Kethrian expression of defeat that cut deeper than any words could manage. Admiral, the quantum cascade destroyed our hyperspace cores, Drask said quietly, pulling up holographic displays that showed the molecular structure of their drive systems, broken at the fundamental level where matter and energy danced between states of existence. Every ship? Vescara asked. Every ship, Drask confirmed, and the weight of those 2 words pressed down on both of them like the gravity of a collapsing starf. 50,000 Kethrians across 12 vessels now floated in a system that preliminary scans showed to be almost worthless. From a resource perspective, no exotic matter deposits, no quantum-stabilized elements, nothing that could possibly repair drives that required materials formed in the hearts of neutron stars and harvested from the edges of black holes. Vescara made herself stand straighter, made herself project the confidence that her people needed even as cold. Calculation told her they had perhaps 6 months before life support across the fleet began failing, in ways their engineers could not prevent. Send out distress beacons on all galactic community frequencies, she ordered, knowing even as she spoke that they were impossibly far from any established trade routes or explored territories. Already transmitting. Admiral, her communications officer reported, his voice carrying the same hollow tone that had infected the entire bridge crew. The hours became days, and the days became weeks. The Kethrians were nothing if not efficient in crisis, rationing supplies with mathematical precision, rotating life support systems to conserve power, even beginning the unthinkable calculations about which ships might be sacrificed to extend the survival of others. Vescara walked the corridors of her flagship and saw families holding each other, saw engineers staring at problems they could not solve, saw the slow death of hope in the eyes of a people who had explored hundreds of star systems and cataloged thousands of worlds, but now found themselves trapped in this barren corner of Spaceon. The 21st day of their marooning, something changed. Admiral. The communications officer's voice cracked with an emotion Vescara could not immediately identify. We have a response to our distress beacon. Vescara rushed to the bridge, her heart's pounding in the quad rhythm of Kethrian excitement. What civilization? She demanded, pulling up star charts and trying to remember what species maintained outposts in unexplored regions. That is the unusual part. Admiral, the officer said slowly, confusion replacing his initial excitement. The signal is coming from inside this system. Impossible, Vescara stated flatly. Our scans showed no advanced civilizations, no space-capable technology. Nothing but a single inhabited world in the 3rd orbital position, with early industrial signatures. Yes, Admiral, but the transmission is definitely artificial and definitely responding to our beacon. Though, the officer paused, manipulating his console with increasing frustration. Though our translation matrices are having significant difficulty with the language structure. Show me. Vescara commanded. The bridge speakers crackled with a transmission that sounded like nothing in the galactic community's databases. Harsh consonants, odd rhythmic patterns. a language that their computers tagged as having no relation to any of the 743 cataloged species. Her translation I worked frantically, building context for mathematical constants and universal physical principles that the unknown transmission included, slowly assembling meaning from the alien words after an hour of processing. Text scrolled across Veskara's screen. Unknown vessels. This is Captain Sarah Chun of the United Nations Space Service ship Perseverance. We have detected your distress signal and are organizing a relief expedition. Our fleet will reach your position in approximately 72 hours. Please confirm receipt of this message and transmit any medical or critical supply requirements. Veskara read the message 3 times, each time finding it more incomprehensible. The third planet? She asked. Confirmed, Admiral. The transmission originates from orbital space around the third planet. We are detecting multiple small fusion signatures consistent with primitive interplanetary vessels. They should not even have fusion drives yet, Drask muttered, pulling up the initial survey data that had dismissed the third planet as a pre-spaceflight civilization with early satellite technology. Our scans indicated they were at least a century away from any interstellar capability. Veskara studied the data with growing confusion. The third planet's inhabitants had somehow detected a distress beacon transmitted on frequencies that required quantum-paired receivers, and somehow translated enough of it to respond. And were somehow mounting a rescue expedition using technology that should not be able to cross interplanetary distances in any reasonable time frame. Respond, Veskara ordered finally. Transmit our supply requirements and engineering specifications for our damage drives, if nothing else. We should determine what they think they can actually do to help. The response came back within minutes, faster than should have been possible given translation difficulties. Specifications received. We will bring what we can. Hang tight, hang tight. The translation AI flagged the phrase as an idiom meaning to maintain position and await assistance. But something about the casual confidence in those 2 words struck Veskara as either admirably optimistic or dangerously naive. She looked at Drask, who was already running probability calculations. Even if they bring supplies, Admiral, they cannot possibly have the exotic matter required to repair our drives, he said quietly. I know, Veskara replied, but hope is a resource too. And our people need something to believe in right now. She authorized a fleet-wide announcement that rescue was coming, carefully avoiding any details that might reveal how impossible the situation truly remained, and watched as spirits lifted across all 12 ships despite the cold mathematics that said they were still doomed in her private quarters that night. Veskara pulled up everything their computers had cataloged about the third planet Earth. They called it, and its inhabitants who called themselves humans. The data was sparse. A young species, barely past their own industrial revolution, prone to internal conflicts but showing recent signs of unity, possessing creativity and adaptability that exceeded their technological development. She studied images of these humans with their 2 eyes and odd bilateral symmetry, watched recorded transmissions that showed their primitive spacecraft held together with what looked like barely adequate engineering, listened to their music and their rare languages and their transmissions full of hope and fear and dreams of touching the stars, and she wondered what these impossible newcomers thought they could do that the ancient and advanced Kethrian civilization could not. 3 days later, her sensors detected the approaching human fleet, and Veskara went to meet the species that had answered a call they should never have heard. The human fleet emerged from behind the system's asteroid belt like a collection of mechanical absurdities that defied every principle of elegant engineering the Kethrians held. Sacred Admiral Veskara watched through the observation ports as the vessels approached, and had to consciously prevent her head tendrils from expressing the disgust that proper Kethrian decorum demanded she suppress. The ships were enormous and ungainly, clearly repurposed from civilian duties, with hull plating that did not match, weapons systems that looked hastily mounted, and drive signatures that fluctuated in ways that suggested barely controlled fusion reactions, pushing against physical limits they were never designed to reach. "They crossed interplanetary space in those?" Drask whispered beside her, his voice carrying a mixture of horror and reluctant respect. The lead human vessel positioned itself alongside the Eternal Wanderer with surprising precision, given its apparent mechanical crudeness, and Veskara studied its hull markings, Hans Perseverance, and beneath that, in smaller text, "Converted mining platform, Earth orbital shipyards." Mining platform. These humans had converted mining equipment into spacecraft and crossed the gulf between worlds to answer a distress call from people they had never met. The communications channel opened with a burst of static that made Veskara's audio processing organs ache, then resolved into a voice speaking accented but comprehensible Kethrian, thanks to real-time translation algorithms that the humans had apparently developed in the 3 days since first contact. "Admiral Veskara, this is Captain Sarah Chun of the Perseverance, requesting permission to come aboard and discuss relief operations." "Permission granted, Captain Chun," Veskara replied, trying to keep the uncertainty from her voice. "We will meet you in Docking Bay 3. The human shuttle that detached from the Perseverance looked like someone had welded a cargo container to a chemical rocket and hoped for the best. But it navigated the docking approach flawlessly and settled onto the deck with barely a shudder when the airlock opened. Captain Sarah Chung stepped through, and Veskara got her first direct look at a human being. Chun was smaller than Veskara by a significant margin, standing perhaps 1.5 meters tall with dark hair pulled back in a style that suggested both practicality and discipline. She wore a uniform that combined military precision with obvious wear and repair, and she smiled with an expression that Veskara's cultural database identified as conveying warmth, confidence, and genuine pleasure at meeting someone new. "Admiral," Chun said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting that Kethrian researchers had noted in their preliminary data. "Thank you for allowing us to help." Veskara carefully grasped the offered hand, mimicking the up-and-down motion that constituted a proper human handshake. "Captain Chun, I must confess that we are surprised to receive assistance from your people," Veskara said carefully. "Our initial surveys suggested your civilization had not yet achieved interstellar capability." Chun laughed, a sound that bubbled up with unrestrained amusement that seemed inappropriate given the dire circumstances. "We have not." "Not really," Chun admitted freely. "The fleet you see out there represents basically everything we could pull together from Earth orbit and the Mars colonies. We stripped mining operations, delayed colony ship departures, and convinced our military to loan us their 3 newest patrol vessels." "Then how did you detect our distress beacon?" Drask interjected, unable to contain his technical curiosity. "The quantum-paired frequencies should be completely beyond your receiver capabilities." Chun's smile widened. "They were. About 4 days ago," she said, pulling a portable data pad from her uniform pocket. "But after we detected your gravitic signatures on our deep space monitoring arrays, which we built to watch for asteroids, not alien fleets, our scientists pulled a lot of very late Knight's reverse engineering receiver technology from first principles. It is messy, it is inefficient, and it probably violates several laws of physics that we have not discovered yet. But it works." Veskara exchanged a look with Drask that communicated their shared incredulity. These humans had invented quantum-paired receivers in 4 days. "Captain Chun," Veskara began carefully, "while we appreciate your efforts to reach us, I must be honest about our situation. Our hyperspace drives require exotic matter that does not exist in this system. components that must be manufactured in quantum foundries around neutron stars, without access to established galactic community supply chains. We cannot repair the damage to our ships. Chun nodded seriously, but her expression remained confident in ways that logic suggested were unwarranted. We reviewed the specifications you transmitted, she said. And yes, we cannot manufacture exotic matter. We barely understand what exotic matter is beyond theoretical physics. But we might have some ideas about alternative solutions. Alternative solutions? Drask echoed. Captain, with all respect, your technology is 3,000 years behind ours. What alternative could you possibly offer? Rather than take offense, Chun's smile turned slightly mischievous. Admiral, may I show you something? She led them to the viewport and gestured at the human fleet assembling in formation around the Kethrian vessels. That ship there used to mine ice from Saturn's rings. That one was carrying colonists to Mars before we repurposed it. And those 3 military vessels were designed to chase down pirates in the asteroid belt, Chun explained. Pointing to each vessel in turn, none of them were built to cross interplanetary space at high velocity. None of them were designed to operate this far from Earth. And according to every regulation and safety standard we have, none of them should have survived the journey here. She turned back to face Verith directly. But we are very good at making things work that should not work. Chun continued. We are very good at finding solutions that are not elegant or optimal but get the job done anyway. And we are very good at refusing to accept that problems are unsolvable just because we do not have the proper tools. Viscara felt something shift in her understanding. A recognition that she might be dealing with a species that operated on fundamentally different principles than the methodical, by-the-book approach that characterized Kethrian civilization. What do you propose? She asked. Chun pulled up technical diagrams on her datapad, showing hybrid systems that combined Kethrian and human technology in ways that looked like engineering nightmares. We cannot fix your hyperspace drives, Chun said bluntly. But we might be able to jury-rig something that gets you to the nearest Kethrian outpost. It will be slow, it will be ugly, and it will require cannibalizing some of our ships. But I think we can do it. Jury-rig? Drask asked, unfamiliar with the term. It means temporary repairs using whatever materials are available, Chun explained. It means creative problem-solving with limited resources. It means making something that works even if it is not pretty. She looked between Viscara and Drask with absolute sincerity. We came here because you needed help. Chun said simply, we are going to find a way to provide that help. Even if we have to invent entirely new fields of physics to do it. Viscara studied this impossible human captain with her worn uniform and confident smile. Leading a fleet of repurposed mining ships on a rescue mission that conventional wisdom said should be impossible. Very well. Captain Chun, Viscara said finally, show us these alternative solutions of yours. Chun's smile could have powered a small fusion reactor, Admiral. You're going to love this, she said, or possibly hate it. Our engineers tell me the reaction could go either way. She was right on both counts. The human engineers swarmed through the Kethrian, ships like a force of nature that could not be stopped or properly. Kategor and Vesker watched from the observation deck of the Eternal Wanderer as teams of humans in mismatched pressure suits floated between vessels, carrying tools that looked primitive compared to Kethrian precision instruments, but somehow accomplished their tasks with brutal efficiency. They are touching everything, Drask said beside her, his voice wavering between fascination and horror as a human engineer casually bypassed 3 security protocols to access the main power distribution node. I instructed our crews to give them full access. Viscara reminded him, though she shared his discomfort, at watching these newcomers interface with Technology they should not understand. One human, a young woman, whose suit bore the name Webb in faded letters, had actually crawled inside the exotic matter containment chamber, a space so delicate that Kethrian engineers required weeks of training before being allowed near it. She is going to contaminate the quantum field alignment, Drask muttered, pulling up monitoring systems that showed the human's movements through the chamber. Instead, the readings showed something impossible. The quantum coherence was improving. How? Drask whispered, zooming in on Webb's work through the monitors. They watched as she attached small human-made devices at strategic points around the chamber. Crude magnetic field generators that pulsed in patterns that should have destabilized the entire system, but instead seemed to be compensating for degradation that the Kethrian instruments had not even detected. Captain Chun appeared beside Viscara, seemingly materializing from nowhere with the disconcerting human habit of moving quietly despite wearing magnetic boots. Marcus found something interesting, Chun said without preamble, gesturing to where Webb was emerging from the containment chamber. That engineer is named Marcus? Viscara asked, having assumed from database images that Webb was a female named Marcus Webb. Yes, Chun confirmed. He is 24 years old, has a doctorate in theoretical physics from MIT, and once rebuilt a fusion reactor using parts from a coffee maker and a medical scanner. That sounds dangerously unsafe. Drask observed it was. Chun agreed cheerfully. But it worked, and that is what matters right now. Webb floated over to join them, pulling off his helmet to reveal a young face with dark skin, bright eyes, and an expression of barely contained excitement. Admiral, your exotic matter drives are incredible, he said, speaking so rapidly that the translation AI struggled to keep pace. The quantum tunneling alone is generations beyond anything we have theorized. But the problem is not the drives themselves. It is the power supply network. He pulled up holographic displays with fumbling enthusiasm that made the precise Kethrian interface controls look clumsy. See, the quantum cascade did not destroy your drives. It destabilized the exotic matter containment fields, Webb continued, which means the drives cannot maintain coherence long enough to generate a hyperspace tunnel. But if we could stabilize the fields using external quantum oscillators, we do not have external quantum oscillators. Drask interrupted. Such devices require neutronium cores and precision, manufacturing far beyond what is available in the system. Webb's grin was absolutely maniacal. Right? You do not have them, he agreed. But we can make something that does the same job using fusion reactors and really aggressive magnetic field manipulation. That is impossible, Drask stated flatly. Cool, Webb replied, completely unfazed. I love impossible problems. Over the following weeks, Viscara watched as human engineers did things that Kethrian education insisted were impossible. They connected fusion reactors from 6 different human ships into a synchronized network that pulsed with quantum resonance patterns calculated on primitive computer systems that processed data at speeds that made Kethrian AI seem sluggish by comparison. They manufactured magnetic field generators using materials stripped from their own life support systems, cannibalizing equipment they needed to survive in order to build components that might save the Kethrian fleet. They worked in shifts that exceeded safe limits, sleeping in 4-hour blocks and consuming stimulants that would have killed Kethrians but merely made humans jittery and more productive, and they did it all with an attitude that mixed absolute seriousness about the technical challenges with moments of humor that seemed bizarre given the via circumstance. Viscar walked through the engineering bay one day to find a group of humans and Kethrians gathered around a problematic power coupling, with a human named Rodriguez explaining his solution while gesturing with a sandwich in one hand and a plasma torch in the other. so we bypassed the quantum regulator entirely. Rodriguez was saying, run the power through this secondary manifold that I am 90% sure can handle the load. And if it explodes, we are already in deep trouble anyway. So really, what do we have to lose? Our lives? Suggested a young Kethrian engineer named Scylla. Though her tone carried curiosity rather than alarm. Details, Rodriguez replied cheerfully. Taking a bite of his sandwich before returning to work, the cultural exchange went both ways. Kethrians learned human expressions like good enough for government work and if it looks stupid but works. It is not stupid. Humans learn Kethrian precision techniques that reduce their error rates by orders of magnitude, and engineering philosophies that emphasized elegant solutions over brute force. But mostly, they learned to work together. Veskara found herself in the main engineering bay watching Drask and Captain Chun argue about power distribution networks. Their disagreement passionate but professional. Two experts from vastly different backgrounds finding common ground in shared technical challenges. The fusion reactors cannot sustain that output level, Drask insisted, pointing to calculations that proved his position. Not individually, Chun agreed. But if we network them and pulse the output in rotational sequence, each reactor only hits peak load for 0.3 seconds, before switching to the next in the chain. Drask studied her proposal, his head tendrils moving through the complex sequence that indicated deep thought. That might work, he admitted slowly. It violates every principle of safe reactor operation. But it might work. Welcome to human engineering, Chun said with satisfaction. The breakthrough came on day 47 of the joint. Operation Marcus Webb burst into the command center where Veskara was reviewing supply inventories. His face flushed with excitement and exhaustion. We have it, he announced. We have a working prototype. Veskara followed him to the test bay, where a small section of Kethrian drive machinery sat connected to an ungainly assembly of human fusion reactors, magnetic field generators, and what appeared to be components from at least 3 different incompatible systems all wired together with connections. That made her engineering sensibilities weep. This should not function, she said. Quietly, I know, Webb replied. But watch. He activated the system, and reality bent. The exotic matter chamber glowed with quantum coherence, stable and sustained despite having no internal power source. Held in perfect alignment by the network of human reactors, pulsing in synchronized patterns that created an artificial quantum field. It works, Drask breathed, staring at readings that confirmed the impossible. It works, Webb shouted, punching the air in triumph around them. Human and Kethrian engineers erupted in celebration, embracing across species lines, sharing joy at a problem solved through collaboration and sheer, stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Fora felt something in her chest tighten, an emotion that took her a moment to identify as hope based not on calculation or probability, but on the demonstrated proof that sometimes the impossible just needed people crazy enough to try. She found Captain Chun in the crowd and extended her hand in the human gesture of congratulation. You were right, Veskara said, about making things work that should not work. Chun gripped her hand firmly. Admiral, we are just getting started, she replied. Now we need to scale this up to fit 12 ships. The real work, as the humans like to say, was only beginning. The combined fleet hung in space like a monument to controlled chaos. 12 Kethrian vessels tethered to human ships in configurations that violated every aesthetic principle of proper spacecraft design. Admiral Veskara stood on the bridge of the Eternal Wanderer, studying the tactical display that showed the complex web of power cables, magnetic field generators, and jury-rigged quantum stabilizers connecting her flagship to no fewer than 4 human vessels. Final systems check, she commanded. trying to keep her voice steady despite the calculations running through her mind. Those calculations were not encouraging. Drask stood at the engineering station, his head tendrils arranged in the pattern that indicated extreme stress. Admiral, the probability of successful hyperspace transition remains at 17%, he reported, reading from data that 3 separate Kethrian computer systems had verified. The quantum field stability is marginal at best, and any fluctuation in the human reactor output could cause catastrophic cascade failure across the entire network. Define catastrophic, Veskara said. Though she already knew the answer, complete exotic matter containment breach, which would create a quantum singularity that consumes everything within approximately 50,000 kilometers. Drask replied with the flat precision of someone reporting nightmare. Cenarius Veskara looked at the display showing their tether connections to the human ships, placing those vessels well within the destruction radius. Captain Chen's voice came through the communication channel with that characteristic human confidence that seemed unaffected by statistical probability. All human vessels report ready for transition attempt. Chun announced, reactor networks are synchronized. Magnetic field generators are at optimal output. And my engineers tell me we are as ready as we are going to get. Captain Chun, Veskara said carefully, you understand the risks we are facing? 17% chance of success, 83% chance we all die horribly, Chun replied with disturbing cheerfulness. Yes, Admiral, we reviewed the calculations. And you still wish to proceed? There was a pause, and when Chun spoke again, her voice carried a different quality. Serious, thoughtful, but utterly resolute. Admiral, my grandmother used to say that nobody ever accomplished anything worthwhile by only doing things that were safe and certain. Chun said, we came here to help you get home, and that is exactly what we are going to do. Even if it kills you? Veskara asked. Especially then, Chun replied, because dying while trying to save 50,000 people is a lot better than dying while doing nothing. Veskara felt that tightness in her chest again, the one that came from encountering a perspective so different from Kethrian pragmatism that it seemed to exist in an entirely different philosophical framework. Kethrians calculated odds and made decisions based on optimal outcomes. Humans apparently made decisions based on stubborn principle and then bent reality to match their expectations. All vessels, prepare for transition, Veskara ordered, committing her fleet and her people to this insane hybrid solution. The next 3 hours were the longest of Veskara's life. Human reactor technicians called out, power levels and voices tight with concentration. Carrion engineers monitored quantum field stability with instruments that fluctuated wildly around theoretical tolerances, and everyone waited while Marcus Webb made final adjustments to the synchronized pulse sequences that were supposed to trick physics into doing things it did not want to do. Admiral, Webb's voice came through, speaking from inside one of the reactor linkage nodes where he had insisted on positioning himself despite the radiation danger. We are ready for ignition sequence. Proceed, Veskara said. The reactors lit up in cascading sequence, human fusion cores pushing beyond their rated specifications. To generate the massive power output required magnetic field generators spun up with winds that transmitted through the hull plating and exotic matter. Containment chambers throughout the Kethrian fleet began to glow with quantum coherence that the instruments insisted was impossible given the external power sources. Field stability at 60% and rising, Drask reported, his voice carrying disbelief. 70%, 85%. The number climbed past every theoretical prediction, past every calculated threshold, past the point where Kethrian science said it could not possibly go. 97% coherence, Drask whispered. staring at his instruments as if they had betrayed him. "This is better than our drives performed before the cascade failure, because you were using tired technology that needed maintenance," Webb's voice called out. Audible strings suggesting he was manually adjusting something in real time. "Our setup is crude, but it is fresh and running at maximum efficiency." Captain Chun's laugh echoed across the communications network. "Attention all vessels," Chun announced. "As we say in the human space fleet, hold on to your butts." Viscara gripped the command console as the hyperspace drive's engaged reality twisted the Kethrians. With their millennia of space travel, recognized the sensation of hyperspace transition, the moment when normal physics surrendered to quantum probability and ships slipped between the layers of space-time. But this transition felt different. Rougher, like traveling in a ground vehicle over uneven terrain, instead of the smooth glide of proper hyperspace flight. Viewports showed the impossible geometries of hyperspace, but overlaid with flickering distortions that came from the human reactors struggling to maintain output. "Transition successful," Drask announced, genuine shock in his voice. "We are in hyperspace. Field coherence holding at 94%. Cheers erupted across both Kethrian and human vessels. Celebration at having beaten the odds and accomplished what calculations insisted was impossible. But Viscara noticed something in the tactical display that made her celebration die in her throat. "Captain Chen," she said quietly, "what are those warnings on your reactor systems?" There was a long pause. "Nothing to worry about, Admiral," Chun replied. But her voice carried a careful quality that suggested otherwise. "Captain," another pause. Then Chun sighed. "We are running at 140% of rated reactor output," she admitted. "To maintain the quantum field stability, we need to keep this power level constant for the entire journey. And your reactors can sustain that?" Viscara asked. "Define sustain," Chun said with dark humor. "They will not explode immediately, but after about 6 months of this output level, the reactor cores will be degraded beyond any possibility of repair." 6 months, Viscara repeated slowly, understanding dawning. The estimated travel time to the nearest Kethrian outpost. "Exactly 6 months, Chun confirmed. "We calculated very carefully. Your ships will be stranded," Viscara said, feeling the weight of what these humans had done, without functioning reactors. "You cannot return home. We figured we would worry about that after we got you to safety," Chun replied. "One impossible problem at a time." Admiral Viscara looked at Drask, who was running his own calculations with growing horror. "Admiral, without their reactors, the human vessels cannot maintain life support for the return journey," he said quietly. "They will be trapped in Kethrian space with no way home." "I know," Viscara said. "They sacrificed their ability to return home in order to save us," Drask continued, his voice conveying an emotion that the Kethrian language did not have adequate words to express. "I know." Viscara repeated. She opened a private channel to Captain Chen. "You knew from the beginning that this would strand your fleet," Viscara said, making it a statement rather than a question. "We suspected," Chen admitted. "But Marcus confirmed it after we got the prototype working. The power requirements were too high for sustained operation without permanent damage. And you proceeded anyway, Admiral." "You needed help," Chun said simply. "What kind of people would we be if we just wished you good luck and went home?" "Practical people," Viscara suggested. "Logical people who prioritize their own survival." "Maybe," Chine agreed. "But also people who could not look at themselves in the mirror afterward. We will figure out how to get home eventually. We always do. But we could not live with ourselves if we did not try everything possible to save you." Viscara closed her eyes, feeling the weight of a debt that could never be calculated in material terms. These humans, with their primitive technology and impossible optimism, had given up everything to save people they had never met, and somehow they had made it work, Captain Chun, Viscara said formally. On behalf of the Kethrian Expeditionary Fleet and all 50,000 souls under my command, I thank you. Just get home safe, Admiral, Chun replied. We can worry about the rest later. The combined fleet sailed through hyperspace, tethered together by cables and courage, heading toward Kethrian space at speeds that should not have been possible using systems that should not have worked, and in the months that followed, two species learned what it meant to truly depend on each other. The Kethrian outpost at Vector Prime had never seen anything like the fleet that emerged from hyperspace on day 179 of the journey. Admiral Viscara stood on her bridge, watching the tactical displays light up with sensor contacts as the Kethrian defense fleet scrambled to identify the strange hybrid formation that had appeared. In their system, transmit identification codes, she ordered, and prepare them for what they are about to see. The response from Outpost Command came within seconds. The voice of Commander Thrace, carrying confusion that rapidly transformed into shock. Admiral Viscara? We'd received reports that your fleet was lost with all hands, Thrace said. And what are those vessels attached to your ships? That, Commander, is a very long story, Viscara replied, and one that is going to change everything we thought we knew about first contact protocols. The combined fleet proceeded to the orbital facilities under escort by bewildered Kethrian defense forces, who could not seem to stop asking questions about the human vessels and their impossible technology. Captain Chun brought the Perseverance alongside the main docking facility with the same casual competence she had demonstrated throughout the entire journey, packing a ship that was held together, mostly by determination and creative welding with precision that impressed the Kethrian harbor masters. The reunions happened in waves. Kithrian families who had given their loved ones up for dead crowded the observation decks, weeping in the four-tone harmonies of their species as they watched the Eternal Wanderer and her sister ships dock safely. Engineers swarmed the vessels, trying to understand the hybrid systems that had somehow brought the fleet home despite violating every principle of proper hyperspace mechanics, and diplomats began the delicate process of figuring out what to do about the humans who had accomplished the impossible. Viscara found herself in a council chamber deep within Outpost Command, facing the Kethrian High Council via quantum-paired hologram. 7 of the most powerful beings in Kethrian civilization stared at her through the projection, their head tendrils arranged in patterns that conveyed everything from curiosity to concern to outright disbelief. You expect us to believe, Council Head Moravec said slowly, that a pre-space flight species not only detected your distress beacon, but mounted a successful rescue operation using technology they invented specifically for this purpose? That is exactly what happened, Counselor, Viscara confirmed. And I have the technical specifications to prove it. She transmitted the data packages that her engineers had compiled, showing the human reactor networks, the magnetic field generators, the synchronized pulse sequences that had sustained their journey. The council members studied the information in silence, their head tendrils moving through complex patterns of analysis. This is remarkable, Councillor Shenva said finally, her tone carrying a mixture of admiration and concern, but also deeply troubling. How so? Viscara asked, because it suggests that humanity's technological development is accelerating at rates far beyond anything we have seen in the galactic community, Shenva explained. They went from primitive fusion drives to quantum field manipulation in a matter of weeks. What will they be capable of in a year? A decade? With respect, Counselor, I believe you are focusing on the wrong aspect of this situation, Viscara said carefully. The question is not what humans might become, but what they already are. She pulled up recordings from the journey, showing human engineers working alongside Kethrian technicians, showing Captain Chun sharing meals with Veskara's crew, showing Marcus Webb teaching young Cathrians about creative problem-solving while learning Cathrian precision techniques in return. They are a species that prioritizes helping those in need over their own safety. Veskara continued, they are engineers who see impossible problems as interesting challenges. And they are people who sacrifice their own ability to return home in order to save strangers. Counselor Moravec leaned forward in his projection. Explain that last part. He commanded. Veskar told them about the reactor degradation, about the human fleet's certain doom if they could not find a way to repair or replace their power systems, about Captain Chun's casual acceptance of potential death as the cost of doing the right thing. The council chamber fell silent. They knew they might die, Moravec said quietly. And they came anyway. They knew they would be stranded, Veskara corrected. Death was merely a possibility they accepted, Councillor Thren, the eldest member of the High Council, spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of centuries and 3,000 years of galactic community history. No species has ever done something like this, Thren said. We have treaties, we have mutual aid agreements. We have protocols for rendering assistance to distressed vessels, but always with the understanding that such aid would not place the rescuers in unacceptable danger. He looked directly at Veskara through the hologram. These humans violated that understanding. Thren continued, they placed themselves in unacceptable danger, sacrificed their ships, and stranded themselves in unknown space. All to save people they had never met and owed nothing to. Yes, Counselor, Veskara confirmed. Then we have no choice, Thren said. And his head tendrils arranged themselves in the formal pattern of binding declaration. The Kethrian High Council hereby grants humanity full technological exchange privileges, immediate protection under Kethrian law, and our formal sponsorship for admission to the galactic community. The other council members signaled their agreement, their head tendrils moving in synchronized patterns of official endorsement. Furthermore, Moravec added, we are authorizing emergency resource allocation to construct new vessels for the human fleet. Vessels built with combined human-Kethrian technology that will allow them to return home. Veskara felt relief wash through her, knowing that the humans who had saved her people would not be abandoned to die in alien space. But Captain Chun, when Veskara delivered the news, had a different reaction. That is incredibly generous, Chun said, standing in the observation deck of the Perseverance and looking out at the massive Kethrian shipyards that were already beginning construction. But I have a better idea. What do you mean? Veskara asked. Chun pulled up design specifications on her datapad, showing schematics that mixed human and Kethrian engineering in ways that were starting to look less like jury-rigging and more like genuine hybrid innovation. Your people understand exotic matter and quantum mechanics, Chun explained. But you have been using the same basic technology for centuries because it works, and there was no reason to change it. That is accurate, Veskara agreed. But humans are really good at taking existing technology and finding new applications. Chun continued, what if we combined Kethrian precision with human adaptability? What if we built ships that used exotic matter drives with human-style modular components? What if we created a whole new generation of spacecraft that neither of our peoples could have developed alone? She looked at Veskara with that characteristic human expression of excited possibility. We could build something amazing together. Chun said. Veskara studied the designs, seeing vessels that blended the elegant curves of Kethrian aesthetics with the pragmatic modularity of human engineering. Ships that could swap components on the fly, adapt to changing situations, and survive damage that would cripple traditional Kethrian designs. The Council will need to approve this, Veskara said slowly. But I think they will see the value in collaborative development. The Council did approve it. Enthusiastically over the following months, the shipyards of Vecta Prime became workshops of innovation as human engineers and Kethrian technicians learned from each. Other Kethrians taught humans about quantum field theory and exotic matter manipulation. Humans taught Kethrians about creative problem-solving and modular design philosophy, and together they built vessels that exceeded what either species could have accomplished alone. Marcus Webb ended up heading the joint research team, developing new hybrid reactor systems. His creative chaos balanced by Drask's methodical precision in ways that produced breakthroughs neither could have achieved. Separately, Rodriguez opened an engineering consultancy teaching Kethrians his philosophy of good enough solutions implemented quickly beat perfect solutions implemented slowly. And Captain Sarah Chun, who had led a fleet of mining ships on an impossible rescue mission, became the first human to command a vessel of Kethrian human hybrid design. The UNSS Perseverance II launched exactly 1 year after the original. Perseverance had answered an impossible distress call. Built from combined technologies and crewed by both species, Veskara stood at the ceremony, watching as Chun took command of a ship that represented everything their two peoples had learned from each other. "What are your orders, Captain?" Veskara asked, performing the traditional Kethrian handover of authority. Chun smiled. That same confident expression she had worn when promising to solve impossible problems. "Set course for Earth," Chun commanded. "We have a lot of people back home who are going to want to meet our new friends." The Perseverance II broke orbit with hybrid drives that combined exotic matter precision with human fusion power, heading toward a small blue world that was about to take its first real steps into the larger galactic community.